Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this alumni event. I'm Frank Berman, the chairman of the Trust in the UK. As you can imagine, one of the things that the Trust has been most keenly missing is the opportunity to continue our series of alumni
Good afternoon, ladies
events.
and gentlemen.
We're all getting used to working remotely, I think, in our own particular ways. The one thing I'm enjoying about this evening's meeting is that I appear on the screen as university guest. University guest shrinks down to the acronym UG. And I think I'm going to suggest to my grandchildren in future that they know me by the name of UG. As UG or as Frank Berman, I welcome you to this event. I would much rather, of course, be in a room with you. But I'm delighted to know that we are together again, and we have the opportunity through the generosity of the Vice-Chancellor and her colleagues to address the topic, which is the only topic anyone can be thinking about at the moment, more or less, and that is COVID-19 and the challenges it places. If you visit the UCT website, and I hope you do all visit the UCT website, you'll be able to see the extraordinary and heartening way in which the university is confronting the multiple challenges and issues that arise. And when I looked at my UCT news this afternoon, I hope you all get the UCT news, I was particularly struck by the articles showing the ingenuity and initiative response from young students to the challenge of finding inventions and ideas to deal with COVID-19. Now, I won't take up more time in introduction, except that we're delighted to have with us the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Phakeng. She's going to talk to you initially. We're then going to pass over to Professor Ed Rybicki, a researcher at UCT, who will tell us about his own work in the area of virology. And we should have time after all of that for questions. Question time is going to be limited. You can post your questions in the Q&A board that you should have on your screen. Question time, as I say, will be there, but it may be limited. So please do make your questions as short and as precise as possible. That's it by way of introduction from me. And I'm now going to ask the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Phakeng, if she would address us. Professor Phakeng.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Sir Frank, and thank you to all the alumni who are taking time to be part of this. COVID-19 hit the University of Cape Town while we were already engaging with our vision for 2030 and how we would do things differently in the academic world in response to the fourth industrial revolution and the many changes that were happening in the world. The idea of disrupting our old ways of doing things has been brought home to us in a very powerful way by the pandemic. It is also making us more aware of our relationship as a university, not just to each other and to Cape Town, but to the world. Because as things stand, it is very clear that Africa's problems are the world's problems, and the problems of the world are also the problems of Africa. I see this as a positive outcome of the crisis and one that will feed UCT's vision for future work. Since lockdown started in South Africa on 26 March, there have been many debates across the higher education sector about how the 2020 academic year should progress. We are working collaboratively with other universities through Universities South Africa and other forums to manage all the challenges that affect the sector as a whole, not only in South Africa. Just today, an hour ago, I was engaging with vice chancellors in the Global Universities Leadership Forum that's hosted by the World Economic Forum. Dealing with these challenges has incurred unplanned costs. We set up the COVID-19 UCT Emergency Fund, which has so far helped with needs such as providing transportation for students who needed to return home after the lockdown in March, disinfecting buildings as they were vacated, sourcing laptop computers to make available on loan and arranging their delivery to more than 1,600 needy students, and purchasing data bundles for students, to name but a few. When students and staff start returning to campus, the COVID-19 UCT Emergency Fund will help provide other needs, such as personal protective equipment for everyone who comes back to campus. And I have to say thank you to all of you who have supported the COVID-19 Emergency Fund. We have already received £10,400 from alumni based in the UK, for which we are hugely appreciative. I want to encourage those of you who have not yet lent your support to this fund to consider doing so via the UCT Trust. UCT's support to students during COVID-19 has been carefully thought out, and we are monitoring progress regularly. At this stage, depending on prevailing conditions, UCT plans to continue remote teaching at least until the 25th of September, and the academic year is scheduled to continue until the end of February 2021 for some students. The plan for a gradual and phased return of some students, as health and safety conditions allow, must not mean that the current emergency remote teaching program will stop. Most UCT teaching will continue remotely until the end of Term 3. And depending on health and safety considerations, we are working on scenarios for vulnerable students and students in lab-based disciplines, as well as disciplines that need face-to-face teaching, such as drama, dance, opera, and so on. We want those students to return to campus in phases before September. We have requested a public health opinion on this possibility, as the health of our campus community members is our top priority. One of the questions that alumni have raised for this meeting is, how will the shift to online learning en masse potentially transform the student experience positively? And how can we ensure the quality of the experience? And this has been our concern as well. So we've taken a careful, considered approach to remote learning. At the start, we conducted a survey that showed that 84% of UCT students have their own devices to learn, and 64% have access to Wi-Fi. We know that some students live in environments that are not conducive for studying. So all online teaching has low-tech options so that students with low bandwidth connection can participate. These options include providing printed learning materials and USB drives for students who cannot access the internet at all. And we started sending these materials 2 weeks ago. We took steps to ensure that as many students as possible had access to online resources. We made laptop computers available on loan to students who meet certain criteria. And we concluded talks with service providers for zero-rated access to UCT study sites and data bundles for students who need them. Students who are required to perform practical work or field work will have time to do so after campus reopens. And students who, for any reason, cannot access online learning from home, or who need additional assistance when campus reopens, will be able to catch up with a program of blended learning, combining online lectures and face-to-face tutorials after the campus reopens. We are meeting the same kinds of needs for postgraduate and addressing completion of degrees that depend on lab, studio, and field work. We acknowledge that for many of our students, hurdles to remote learning are not the only need of a laptop and data, but also the lack of physical spaces that are conducive to learning. We have set up support through UCT institutional offices as well as faculties. This is a learning space for all of us, and we are documenting those lessons because all of us are doing this en masse for the first time at UCT. We are convinced that the quality of education we offer remains the same, despite the fact that we do it online. We've been working hard to make sure that the quality is not degraded. Our Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching conducted more than 70 webinars to help our teaching staff to move their courses from traditional delivery to online formats. The idea, of course, is not that because it's online, it's just transmission, it's to be as creative as possible. And the focus has been to get academics to think about learning processes involved in the courses and to shift towards a more team-based approach to course design to create the best possible learning experience for students, whether they are learning remotely or in a traditional classroom. Lecturers are learning how a more blended approach to teaching and learning, using the best of face-to-face and online tools, can enrich the learning experience for students when they return to campus. Online learning has been a practice at UCT for years, even though we are a face-to-face university. It allows students to more easily revisit course materials, ask questions, and get personal support in and out of a normal teaching hours. It gives them more flexibility to manage their time. It is especially helpful to students who may be second language English speakers or require accommodations for a disability, because they can go back to their rooms after the class during the day and look at the lectures again in the evening. In 2018, we launched an automated video recording venue to support academics going online. And as of the end of 2019, about 60% of lecturers had chosen to record their lectures. COVID-19, in a way, fast-tracked this process for the remaining academics who are not recording their lectures. Since lockdown, more than 650 videos have been captioned for students, totaling more than 677 hours of video material. As one student said in a thank you note, and I quote, "The subtitles and transcripts make it much easier to study from," close quote. Lecturers have discovered new ways of engaging with students online, and one lecturer wrote, "I have realized that social distancing does not mean social disconnection. So I'm recording my audios as if I'm talking to my students," close quote. Another lecturer reported seeing, and I quote, "considerable affordances in the online space that were not there in previous modes for me," close quote. She added that she is also better able to discuss difficulties with students. And I quote, "Previously, I followed up poor lecture attendance and poor test results with an email asking students to see me. Whereas students ignore or don't see these emails, all the class now responds to my WhatsApp messages," close quote. Students are also now engaging with lecturers more than they could during a 45-minute lecture. Since teaching began on the 28th of April, we've been monitoring student activity closely. The data analytics show that 84.6% of undergraduate students are actively engaged across the institution, by 17th May. We can identify students who require extra support, and faculties contact those who are not active online. For instance, a student in Deep Mpumalanga was dealing with 12 hours of load shedding in a day. And they provide alternative low-tech material and encourage students to engage through their course intranet platforms, chat rooms, and forums, with additional support through tutors. And I have received thanks for many parents whose students have been contacted this way, because some students that we contact, we realize that if it's not load shedding, some of them have been in hospital, or one problem or the other, nothing to do with remote emergency learning. And parents have been very appreciative of the efforts that we make to reach students who are not engaging online. We are also identifying drawbacks to online teaching. A physics lecturer pointed out, for instance, that her students don't get to work collaboratively on problem solving, which they would normally do on a regular basis. Without access to a lab, her students must create their own homemade apparatus. So we see that as a weakness, but also as a challenge to lecturers to think about how do you create a possibility of students to work collaboratively on problem solving. We realized early that students would need a central help facility during remote learning, especially for complex situations if they don't know which of UCT's many services to consult. Because as you can imagine, the lockdown happened in March. First year students were on their second month at UCT. And so we launched UCT Cares with an email address and an SMS number to assist students. Through UCT Cares, we get about 20 unique queries per week. Student wellness and many other UCT services moved online quickly to continue supporting students. Students have been responding to institutional initiatives to build a sense of community online. They are contributing to UCT's lockdown letters page, which we launched a few weeks ago, where students and staff members write about life under lockdown. The Student Parliament met online recently with 58 members of the Student Parliament engaging for more than 4 hours. Student societies provide platforms for video challenges, such as in the netball and ballroom dancing. We are looking at ways to assess students' experiences to help us better plan and deliver for the third quarter. We are also contemplating the very real possibility of having to conclude the 2020 academic year without returning to face-to-face teaching. We have constituted a working group to discuss and plan the future of teaching at UCT, drawing on these lessons for new approaches to teaching from 2021 onwards. This is fully aligned with our approach to teaching and learning in our Developing Vision 2030. So this crisis reinforces UCT's long-held focus on social responsiveness in our research and in our teaching practice. UCT experts are advising the government at provincial and national level on a broad range of sectors, including health, higher education, human settlements, science and technology, social development, small business development, and trade and industry, among others. We have joined staff with the Provincial Department of Health and the National Health Laboratory Services working in local hospitals and clinics. More than 100 UCT medical students are manning the COVID hotline at a local provincial hospital. UCT's Department of Medicine is running weekly webinars for healthcare professionals to provide updates on the local outbreak and to provide expert presentations on COVID-19 management experiences and results coming out of research studies. UCT's Knowledge Translation Unit is working with the Department of Health and with colleagues in Brazil to launch online training programs to deal with COVID-19 in low resources settings. Research at UCT that is relevant to the pandemic includes potential tests of immunity, epidemiology studies, drug trials, studies on pathogenesis, and the immune response of the virus, including in specific populations, such as those co-infected with HIV and TB, and the development of low-cost personal protective equipment. Of course, the big question is, what will it take to develop a vaccine and reagents for the virus that causes COVID-19? I am delighted to introduce to you a UCT researcher who is working on possible answers to that question. Last year, the Department of Science and Technology's National Intellectual Property Office recognized him as UCT's most prolific inventor. Professor Ed Rybicki has authored or co-authored over 160 articles and 25 reviews in peer-reviewed journals, and about 20 book chapters, as well as popular and opinion articles and conferences report backs in journals. He and his colleagues also have the largest biomedical patent portfolio in Africa. Professor Rybicki's main research interests are in the area of vaccine biotechnology and the production of proteins in plants that can be used as reagents, diagnostics, and vaccines. Most notably, the field of human papillomavirus vaccine technology, in which he is a world leader. He is the founding director of the Biofarming Research Unit, or the BRU as we call it at UCT, whose central mission is the expression of pharmaceutically relevant recombinant proteins in plants and insect cells. The BRU has worked with Professor Annelies Williamson's vaccine group at UCT to develop novel DNA vaccine candidates. The BRU spin-out company, K Biopharms, is making a portion of the S protein in plants as a reagent to be used in antibody detection tests, and for helping another company make monoclonal antibodies to be used as therapeutics or in serological testing. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I will now hand over to Professor Rybicki to share his work with you. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. I think you've given half my talk, so I'll just spend the next 10 minutes asking you for money. So Frank, Vice Chancellor, guests, colleagues, I qualified at UCT for the first time in 1976. I got another 3 degrees after that. So I'm a fairly well qualified alumnus, plus I've worked at UCT since 1981. This is actually one of the most exciting times of my career. We are sitting in the middle of a pandemic that has actually hit us personally. Right, I started my career, in fact, with the onset of the AIDS pandemic. We've gone through a flu pandemic in 2009, but nothing has been quite so immediate in terms of its effect on society and effect on people than this. And Hetty mentioned teaching. I think UCT has done more to teach teachers in the last 3 months than they've done, in my experience, in the last 40 years. In terms of teaching techniques, teaching methods, teaching facilities, and facilitating the use of video, high-end video, low-end, narrated PowerPoints and everything else, it has actually been quite eye-opening. And given that I lecture virology and I'm into the second course of virology this year so far, 3rd year as opposed to 2nd year, it's literally on a day-by-day basis. I can put things up on social media to educate students. That has actually been quite game-changing. But what we've been doing, we started early on, this is February already, with a very smart postdoc called Manny Margolin in Annelies's and my labs, who made the protein of the new virus in 2 different systems. As background, we have 20 years of experience in looking at HIV vaccine candidates, and this is more or less exactly the same in terms of approach and even in terms of the kind of protein that we needed to make. We were successful right out of the blocks. We made it in animal cells, we made it in plants. Plants it's going to sound weird to most people. It's a 30-year established technology. It works extremely well. And we've actually got several inventions to do with making it work better. We put them all to work in making the S protein of SARS-2, as we'd rather call it, than COVID-19 virus. And were very successful very quickly. We then immediately applied for money for this. And after 3 months of messing around, we got told that the government is not supporting research on vaccines in South Africa for this virus, in direct contrast to New Zealand, which has just given $37 million to support vaccine research in New Zealand. But I will not say anything further on that. What we've done, though, is managed to make something that we can supply to other people. When you get a brand new virus like this, you have nothing to work with. There are no reagents, there are no kits, there's nothing that anybody can set up diagnostic tests with. So we were able to give people very early on samples of protein that were laboriously purified in our labs to get them started. People at UCT in the Institute for Infectious Disease and Molecular Medicine. At the same time, the spin-out company that derives from our group, but was funded by the government and by UCT to 25%, K Biopharms, they very, very quickly out of the blocks started making part of the protein, and almost immediately were successful. They also applied new technology that had just been invented in our lab to improve production. and have partnered with another very novel company in South Africa called Afrobodies to make monoclonal antibodies derived out of alpacas. Turns out that llamas, camels, alpacas, and related animals make very, very unique antibodies that are extremely well suited to being made in plants. And that work has actually already been successful. They've got antibodies, they've got the protein, they've put it together in prototype test kits. Because, of course, one of the consequences of being out here in Africa and not having this kind of thing already funded means that we are at the end of everybody's priority list for test kits. We've already run out of test kits for testing for SARS-2 to some extent. It's actually handicapping efforts to test and trace, for example, and development of serological assays to find out who has been infected, who is equally handicapped. Plus, there's a lot of rubbish on the market very, very quickly because everybody jumped onto the bandwagon. So getting something that people trust, that you can use to diagnose reliably that somebody has had SARS-2 is really imperative. And it's very nice to know that, in fact, these sorts of efforts in Cape Town and in South Africa are working. There's an extremely inventive academic community in Cape Town and in Johannesburg, for example, in Pretoria, where people are capable of doing amazing things. We have we're as good as anybody else in the world when it comes to this sort of thing. The one major obstacle in our way is money, pure and simple. We literally do not have the money that is backing up this kind of thing because it's only now about to be dispersed. 4 months into the pandemic, and now the money is going to start being released. We've been going on discretionary funds, on savings, on research monies that we've squirreled away. And it looks good. It actually looks like we could have made vaccines if we'd been funded early on. But it's not lost because this goes to possibly next generation vaccines. Just maybe. This virus is not going away. It almost certainly is going to establish itself as a seasonal virus. And as somebody who's in at least one risk group, and that's old, as in over 65, and possibly others, including respiratory disease, I really do not want to get this, whether it is this year, next year, or any time. We need vaccines. We need them now. And if we can do anything to actually make that happen, we would be very happy. And I think that would be about it.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Professor Rybicki, and thank you, Vice Chancellor. It is an extraordinary combination of circumstances we face, isn't it? I mean, quite extraordinary, something which goes well beyond anything that any of us can have imagined in the past as challenges, but also as in the nature of the problems it raises for every aspect, I would have thought, of a university's functioning. In that respect, UCT is obviously not unique. All universities are facing challenges of exactly the same kind. Vice Chancellor, if I can exercise my prerogative of kicking off question time, you focused quite rightly on teaching. Teaching is the fundamental function of the university. Teaching is critical to what you do and to your position in the country. And I must say, I personally am immensely impressed by the ingenuity and effectiveness of many of the expedients you have adopted. But I was wondering also, listening to Ed Rybicki after you, about research and the position of research students. Because research science is not a single lone individual activity, isn't it? This is something which is done in teams and done under the stimulus of contacts with people. What are you able to do to address the particular problems of research students and research groups?
Thank you, Sir Frank. The challenges of research students differ. So the students whose research has been disrupted by the pandemic who actually cannot continue with their research, and that's particularly students, for example, who are in anthropology, who were on track, for example, to do ethnographic studies, who are going to spend time in communities. They simply can't go on, and some of them have been advised by their supervisors, if they can't postpone their studies, it's better to change their studies, because spending time in communities at this time is much more risky. So there's disruptions such as that. The students who are going to collect data in schools, and those ones are waiting for schools to go back. So their situation is a little better if they're collecting data from classrooms. And lab-based, students who are doing lab-based research are in a different situation, because we have in our plan for a phased return to campus, we have put them in the second phase. The first phase was the health sciences students, the final year health sciences students. The second phase, which is the students who will be next to come back to campus, includes the final year students who are doing lab-based and postgraduate students. So there is a plan for postgraduate students who are doing lab-based research for them to come back earlier to continue, with the plan, of course, of making sure that there's physical distancing and we don't increase the risks of students getting infected. So we are thinking about that. Of course, there are students, and I'm sure Ed might be aware of this. There are, of course, researchers who are on campus who are doing research on COVID. We've got more than 10 projects that started after COVID that focus on COVID, and they've been going on campus with their teams. And so those ones will, are advantaged in that way that they will continue, but the rest of them will come in phase 2, return to campus. Thank you, sir.
I wonder,
comment there.
Do you want to add to that? You must have experience of your own too in your area.
Thank you. Yes, we do. For example, we have COVID projects going on, as I've described. There's maybe 4 people out of a total group strength between myself and Professor Williamson of 40 people that are actually able to be back at work right now. And we've got people who are trying to finish up PhDs, finish up MSCs. We have honours students whose entire practical course is still to be done, as in their projects. The kinds of access, well, it's not actually very high density work. We're in laboratories, there's an element of microbiological safety all the time anyway, so it should be reasonably easy to get them back to work. But right now, literally only 10% of them are.
I was thinking of something else as well, which is, after all, university study and research work, you're an ideas factory, aren't you? Yeah. And ideas are stimulated by contact with other people, by exchange of ideas with other people. The one thing that fascinated me particularly in Ed Rybicki's initial remarks was his reference to social media. Social media's got a bad name in my mind, but obviously it's got a use. How in particular do you see your students are able to use social media in ways which are invigorating and imaginative?
I mean, it's interesting how students have taken on the challenge of COVID using social media to address some of the challenges. I mean, there's for example, students who have started a mentorship group that is running on social media on Instagram, and they offer support to students, but they make themselves available through social media so that students who are sitting at home can reach them through their Instagram handle and meet with them virtually. I think that is fantastic. We also have students students are organizing webinars. I mean, it's interesting how many invitations I get to participate in webinars that are organized by students, just through Facebook Live or whatever. So students have grabbed this moment to do the things that they want to do. And most of them that are sort of focused on their studies, supporting one another, connecting with one another, but also the things that, as I said, the netball team is doing online. I mean, you think the netball team will connect only on the field, and suddenly they've got activities that, you know, they are busy with on social media. So it's as if social media has become a tool for students to connect, to create a possibility of them to connect even when they are not on campus. We started this page on our website of sharing lockdown stories, and personally I thought we're going to get a lot from staff only. When you go to the page, it's an exciting space. I mean, we get a lot of submissions from students as well, and it's all positive. And you know, Sir Frank, one of the interesting things, I mean, that I didn't say in my input, that I think it's important to say here, is that, you know, our communications and marketing department reported to us at the Leadership Lekgotla last week that the sort of the perception and the response to UCT on social media during this crisis has been very positive. So they put down the comments, the posts that are about UCT, where parents post things on Twitter, on social media, about how grateful they are for UCT to support their students. Students respond, and then one student posted something negative, and then the other students came on that students to say, shut up. I mean, we're getting prints. I mean, it's a very, and CMD was saying it's a very different response to the last time we had a crisis. That the last time we had a crisis, there was so much enthusiasm to focus on the negative or what's not working, or to even manufacture the negative. And now there's much more of appreciation of the efforts that we're making, and that appreciation is expressed through social media. And because they are a marketing department, they can even manage this to see, they can even analyze this to see the positive sentiments and the negative sentiments. So it's a very interesting thing how social media is, the students are taking on to use it to support one another, to continue the connection, but also to communicate with us what's working, even under these difficult circumstances.
I can add to that.
Thank you. Sorry, I keep interrupting you. I've been a fairly avid user of the internet for educational and learning purposes for 25 years now. In fact, we started when UCT first got its webpage. But I notice I get a spike in stats because I blog, and I blog for experts, I blog for civilians, and I have a Twitter feed. I get a spike in stats when something like this happens because people are out there desperate for information from somebody they trust. It's then trying to be a fair arbiter, saying, well, I think this is a reliable piece of information, I'm passing it on. But also picking up things for myself. I used to pick up a couple of papers a day via Twitter. I'm picking up 10 or more now, every single day, literally. I'm building a collection that's going to start looking like UCT libraries fairly soon, if I ever try to print it out. It's a way of actually getting on top of information and then passing it on to other people. It's invaluable. I don't know that enough UCT staff, for example, actually appreciate how useful it is. And the Vice-Chancellor herself is, in fact, a staunch proponent of social media and has actually led the way to a large extent at UCT. But there's still a lot of people who simply don't see the value. And I think this could well do something to change it, because it's one of the only ways we can actually interact. Unless you're Skyping somebody on a personal basis or having departmental Zoom calls or whatever. That's one of the, it's quick, it's easy, it's fire and forget and then come back to it 10 minutes later, see you've got 20 replies. It's actually a really, really productive way of interacting with students and with colleagues.
Well, if I may come in on that, the one thing which is really encouraging is the ready response from young people, because they're used to communicating in different ways. And once the idea gains ground that you can use that form of easy connection in your academic and your scholarly life, as well as in your personal life, then the sky is the limit, isn't it? As long as there are no dangers involved. I simply wondered whether either of you had reached the point yet at which you've begun to think about what the longer term consequences are going to be for university education, about from the way we've had all of our ideas and systems given a good hard seismic shake and forced to rethink a lot of things which we must have taken for granted in the past. But if I just one final remark, Vice Chancellor, the one thing which has really struck me with great pleasure and admiration in the tone of your messages out to the student body is keep in touch with us, but keep in touch with one another. You are part of a community which you don't lose when you leave the campus.
Exactly. Thank you, Sir Frank. Let me start by answering Paul's. I can see Paul's posted a question that says, how is UCT handling complications for 2021 first year class arising from the disruptions to this academic year? It's a huge question. It's about the future. I want to answer Sir Frank's question, but Sir Frank's question is the future beyond that. But the immediate future is thinking about 2021. You know, it's a moving target, but we're making decisions. So we've already made the decision to not use the national benchmark tests. Normally, in addition to our admission requirements, students have to write a national benchmark test. It's only the Faculty of Science that actually had stopped it a few years ago, but it's been happening, and we use the results of that as a way to also check whether the student qualifies for acceptance or not. We have now said we're not going to be using that, and of course we run the national benchmark tests. They are run by us at UCT. So the complexities even of running those tests, as well as many other complexities. So we're going to be running those tests, but for a different purpose, not for entrance requirements, and that's a decision that we made as a result of COVID. But one thing that we didn't change is to open online applications exactly the same time as we did last year. What we did last year, we started online applications much earlier than we usually did, we historically did, to ensure that more students can apply. And the other good thing that we did last year was to also consider students, grade 11 students, and give them provisional acceptance. So even as the lockdown started, there were students already who are doing grade 12 this year who applied when they were doing grade 11. They already had a UCT provisional offer. So it's sort of we have captured them softly, but we opened it and we've already started making offers, provisional offers for applications that have been coming in. And it's interesting because what we're doing, we're checking how the numbers are going in just the stats. Where were we this time last year, even without the lockdown, and where are we now? And at the moment, it's a 5% difference, but we're monitoring it closely. We want to continue with the recruitment online of students because we miss doing an open day, but we're continuing online with the applications as if nothing is happening. Of course, the students who are applying using whatever the latest results they have, and that's something that we're going to have to work with. There isn't much that we can do. We're working with the department as Universities South Africa, the basic education department, in terms of when they plan to write exams. So the department at this stage has confirmed with us that they've shifted the date, so they are sure that the matrics will write towards the end of November, and in December they'll be marking, and in January, towards the end of January, we'll get results. We understand that this might change depending on how things pan out with the pandemic, but that's what we're working on right now, that if that happens, you know, we might still have the same numbers that we have. Of course, there's a danger that we might not get the enrollment figures exactly the same, but we're working hard to make sure that we get the same levels. It's a moving target, as I say, Paul. It might change. Sir Frank is asking about how will this shape the future of higher education. I think hugely, and what we are doing as the UCT leadership is to, I mean, and that's why I said in my input, I said it came at the right time whilst we were crafting and already engaging the university on our Vision 2030. And one of the things that I have been saying with Vision 2020, even before the pandemic, last year, as I was talking to different constituencies, I was saying for us to be able to think about the future of UCT, where we can produce or graduate students who can lead in an uncertain and rapidly changing world. The only way we can do that is if we become uncomfortable with our current present. And I said to colleagues, to do that and to lead in this change, in the rapidly changing world, we have to disrupt ourselves. And I use this phrase, we've got to disrupt ourselves. And it was interesting how it was received, because some people saw it as, yes, we've got to disrupt ourselves. Some people said, but that's a little negative. We don't want to be disrupted. And boom, came COVID, we disrupted. We no longer have to disrupt ourselves. So what I've been saying to our leadership is that, in a way, the pandemic, painful as it is, it has done something that we've been saying we want to do it to ourselves so that we can think outside the box and do things differently. So we thinking the future of higher education will always have online learning, either as part of a blended offering or as a standalone. There is no way we will continue without some online learning in our university. And of course, we as UCT are better positioned because this, we've been working on doing this. So it's strengthening that in terms of looking towards the future. So the future will have that. But it's also forcing us to try new things. I mean, just in terms of thinking about how we do our work, the amount of work that we do online, the amount of productivity that we get by just working remotely is forcing us to think, do we need everyone to be on site all the time? Is there something, could there be a possibility of thinking about our levels of efficiency and being comfortable with the fact that perhaps the future is a future where we use our buildings differently, that not everyone has to be on campus. And the third thing is about thinking about digitization and artificial intelligence. This is the time. I've challenged the COO and our Executive Director for Properties and Services to say to them, this time when we don't have many people on campus, it is the time to explore possibilities of having bots that can cut grass. Because when people are on campus and you want to do that, you get pushback. Workers don't want it because they think you want to fire them. But when they're not there, you can try it. You can try a bot that does deep cleaning in our residences, because deep cleaning is a challenge at the moment when the workers are there. Workers demand to be paid more because of the chemicals that they use. Isn't this time the luxury of testing these things without having human beings who see this as a threat? Is it time to be thinking about what could driverless journeys look like? Whilst there are no drivers, whilst we don't, can we be, so I've been saying perhaps this period that we have gives us also an opportunity of thinking about the future, even in terms of those kinds of operations on campus. And so we are exploring those possibilities. And so I think the future will look different in terms of how we offer education. We're also thinking about how we continue with internationalization. We're hosting a webinars on that, and I've been engaging with world global university leaders on this. How can we think about giving our students international experience in this environment? What this situation now says, our internationalization, ways of internationalizing higher education are not necessarily sustainable. And of course, they are also not inclusive, because if you're poor, you really can go on a semester study abroad program. Can we think about these differently? And we're talking with our partner universities in the US, in the UK, as well as elsewhere in Europe about, can we think about semester study abroad or international experience for students differently now that we are all online? So the future looks different, Sir Frank, in so many different ways, not only in teaching and learning, but also in terms of our operations on campus.
Well, we don't have any more written questions, so let's carry on this conversation. I mean, Ed, how do you see this affecting the way in which you work in your own very specific field? Opportunities, clearly there are opportunities that you would never have been brought face to face with in the past. What are the most interesting ones for you?
I think in terms of teaching, we've never bothered to share our undergraduate or postgraduate teaching with anybody before. Now, all of a sudden, it's all online. It's all there in form of PowerPoints, videos, whatever you like. We could actually build that into a curriculum. We could start putting it up and testing it against other people's. And that would be revolutionary. People at UCT are very, very wedded to stand up in front of a class and no, I don't want to make my material available because it's copyright, when the point is it's copyrighted by somebody else because you photocopied some textbook. The thing, I think, it's forced people to be inventive. It's forced people to actually be original and explore ways of teaching that they never, ever thought of. Mm-hmm. And now it is actually going to enable ways of teaching that we never dreamed were possible, and actually extend it. We could actually extend our lecture series into other universities where they don't teach these subjects, for example, or they don't have a member of staff who teaches in that discipline, and actually have it available like the Open University, for example. Research, not so much. I think that requires hands on a bench, or the kinds of stuff that we do. You're doing wet work, somebody's got to be in a lab and actually do it. What will have improved is the ways of talking to people about it and sharing it, because that's been a worldwide revolution in openness and pre-publication. You had no idea just how heavily the so-called bioarchive server, which was developed from the archive server that was used for maths and physics papers, for example, that are all pre-published. And then when people have done enough criticizing, they get sent off to a journal. Biology just started doing it. And they're doing it because of COVID. So there's a revolution for you. You're able to share something that a lab has put out this week, literally, comment on it, say, well, this didn't work, and then they revise their paper and get it published eventually. But meantime, you have a heads up that you never had. It was never possible before.
Well, that is interesting, but of course you're talking to a lawyer, and probably another lawyer out there as well. The copyright's important all the same, isn't it? Because the one thing you don't want to happen is that other people are just pirating what you do, perhaps distorting it, and perhaps even in other corners of the world selling your product to their students or in some sort of commercial relationship. It's a really challenging balance, isn't it, between wanting to keep to yourself what is your own and special to your university and spreading the benefits abroad. I was really struck by what you said there about journal publications. One has been reading for years now about the problems with peer reviewing. Peer reviewing is grinding to a halt. It's becoming too heavy. It's a burden on people. It's not done properly. You're talking about peer reviewing, which is happening almost in real time, isn't it? Before you get to any kind of formal process. Well, that must be healthy, mustn't it?
It's healthy in one way and not in another, in that if you can get a coterie of admirers to boost your paper, that's what everybody complains could happen. Actually, this is transparent. You can have a look and see, well, this person obviously is just a paid booster or an unpaid booster. And that the people who are making the sensible comments are the ones who actually know what they're talking about and have something to say, and would probably have been asked to peer review that thing if they had enough time. But as it is, they've gone looking for it because they're interested. And the kind of pre-publication boost you get for a decent piece of work is absolutely incredible. It was already known that if you tweet about a paper that you've just written, you actually get a lot more citations than if you didn't, for example. But I think you'll find this could be universal, is that it's happening in wet science that we're doing now. It's happened for years in maths and physics and astrophysics. I'm sure it'll be happening in some of the social science type disciplines right now as well, just because it's working everywhere else. And the one thing it does do is it puts you in touch with a bunch of people who would then correspond with you about what it is that you have just done that hasn't even in fact been fixed in print yet. I think that's incredibly valuable. And the copyright issue, I think people are lazy. They're taking stuff from other people, they're copying stuff out of textbooks. I've been trying to write a textbook for the last 10 years. I've been trying the stuff out on students for 10 years, and it's all mine. I actually had to get the University of Cambridge to take down a clone they did of my site at one point because they didn't ask me and it was out of date. And eventually I got hold of their web administrator and said, listen, we could actually talk to the lawyers, but let's not. So they took it down. That can happen, and that's something that we actually need to be a little more educated about.
Well, now we're coming close to time. We don't have any written questions. Vice-Chancellor, yours is the last word. Tell us now, before we switch off, what is the really inspirational idea, challenge, which is you would single out as the one for the year that's coming, for the academic year 2021?
For the year that's coming, and perhaps more than a year, our top challenge is going to be budgets, financial, because what we don't talk about is how this COVID situation has disrupted our budget 2020, and therefore are thinking about the future. And so when I said, when we think about the future, and we're thinking also about, we've been working on financial sustainability, and so we're thinking about how do we use the limited resources that we have to be creative, to be innovative, and prepare students for the world, the different world of work that they will have post COVID-19. And that's going to be the challenge. It won't just be how do you produce those students, but how do you do it with the limited resources that we have? And I think we are equal to the task. As I said, it's an opportune moment to have this kind of crisis, given where we are as a university and what we've been positioning ourselves to do. And so the debate that we're having is, can you be innovative and do new things, different things, without more money? And yesterday I said to colleagues, we're going to have to try this. Because what it means is that we've got to think carefully about what is it that we stop doing? What is it that we start doing differently? And how do we think about different or other ways of generating income that we haven't thought about before, but because we are in this situation, we've got to think about. So I still think, even as this big danger that we might have too much financial problems and not be able to do everything, I see a silver lining. I think if we can weather this storm, we are going to come out with a lot of innovation that we wouldn't have been able to do if it's comfortable. You know, there's something about being successful, Sir Frank. You know, when you're successful, the temptation is to be comfortable and relax and to say, why change what's working? It is only when what's working is challenged, and it's challenged sometimes by a crisis, it's challenged sometimes by a financial or whatever, that you start thinking differently. But because you are in a place of excellence, when you think about it differently, you don't let go of the demands of yourself, or the expectations, the high expectations of yourself. So it is that gives me hope that even with this crisis, as we think of doing something else, excellence will remain in place and we will continue to lead. But it's forcing us to do that we might probably have not done it if we didn't have a crisis. So I remain hopeful and positive and enthusiastic about the future.
Well, that's an excellent note on which to bring these interesting proceedings to an end. It's the message that's going to go out, Vice-Chancellor, to your enthusiastic, committed supporters in the UK. It isn't just a question of UCT holding their hand out. It isn't just Ed Rybicki's begging bowl. It's that you are looking for ways in which you can put the support you get to the best possible and most efficient use. And the other message which will go to your supporters in the UK is don't forget the immediate challenges of COVID-19.
Yes.
That emergency fund is there for a purpose because there are needs that nobody could have forecast and new needs which are emerging all the time. Those contributions are one which we will be actively seeking. So thank you both very much indeed. Thank you from all of us and our very good wishes. As you say at the end of your messages, keep safe, be well.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you.
Thank you all, and good night.